you got Triton Research. You've been around the block on Wall Street. We had a lot of winners and losers. I guess let's start, with, I guess they're a loser. They haven't really come to market yet, and that's WeWork. They made some changes to their corporate governance. They're obviously trying to appease investors here. Is that going to be enough to get this out the door?
Well, so WeWork, if we were going to use WeWork as an example of what we know in general about winners and losers, even though there are a bunch of different pieces of our scoring system and a lot of things we look at, there's sort of three things that you can point to that when combined are really dangerous, and WeWork is a poster child for all of them. The first is losses. When you're losing billions of dollars, that's problematic, right? The second is lack of transparency. Like when you're really opaque and people can't figure out, like, why are you losing money so much? When are you ever going to make money? And you serve up 400 pages of problem and it doesn't give you the answers. Like, this is worrisome, right? And then lastly, arrogance. Right? Investors really don't like that, right? Because it's sort of a trust thing when you hand over billions of dollars to a company that's not been public before. Public investors have a very hard job figuring out the right price for these things. So when confronted with opacity, losses, and arrogance, it makes that job really hard, which is why WeWork is struggling the way that it is.
Can you quantify that, or actually even the opacity question? Because obviously losses, there's a table for that.
Right.
But your work does a lot with like a scoring system and factoring in these other things, like all the red flags. How do you think about actually quantifying arrogance or the level of clarity that a company gives you?
Well, so, arrogance in general is hard to quantify, but what we can quantify is the opacity. Internally we joke, and this has been talked about, the obfuscation index. Like, WeWork is not a complicated business at all. And they say, well, we build locations, and over time, those locations become profitable once they cross the break-even point. And they have 550 of them, so untangling this whole mess is actually not that easy to do if they don't provide the numbers. And so having now filed 2 amendments to an S1 that had no numbers at the unit level at all, they still seem to be not getting the message that obfuscation and opacity are really unfavorable things to have in a document like this. Again, when you're asking for $4 billion for a company that loses $2 billion a year.
The arrogance part of it, and by that I mean perhaps some of the rather more eyebrow-raising parts of the corporate governance, the fact that his wife was able to perhaps nominate the next executive if he was to leave, that has been now struck off. Do you think they're getting that this overzealous confidence in the way that particularly the founder controls a business and the family might, is being changed enough to help ease some of those concerns?
What I would say, just as an observer and somebody who reads all these documents, is they were so far off the scale before, they've only dialed themselves back to like normal outrageous.
Why haven't investors
as opposed
told them this? Why hasn't SoftBank and the like said, this is really unusual and perhaps this isn't going to be taken down that easily?
Right. It's a really good question because there are a lot of very capable, experienced, knowledgeable, smart people around the table with this situation. One of the things we look at here, as far as all the things in the document this morning about taking away the 20-to-1 votes, changing the governance structure, making it kind of sort of maybe on the way to a real board, but not quite, and all that stuff. Uber did all this housekeeping way before they attempted an IPO. These guys have now put themselves in a position where they're kind of doing some of it now, but only when forced, which makes it hard for, I think, investors to trust them. And you have to trust them right now because it could be, given the type of business this is, with all of the lease obligations and all of the debt, it could be that the equity is worth nothing. Right, when you're losing $2 billion a year. And so the burden of proof is really on this team to explain why the equity has value. And 20 votes per share versus 10 votes per share actually doesn't address the issue of the equity value.